In a world where feeding a crowd often means breaking the bank, there was a time when large families made every penny stretch with ingenuity and heart. Today, we're celebrating the forgotten meals, simple, hearty dishes that turned modest ingredients into feasts, proving that love and creativity could fill even the largest tables. Depression-era vegetable soup. There's something deeply comforting about a pot of vegetable soup simmering slowly on the stove, especially when it's made from whatever the pantry or garden can offer. During the Great Depression, this humble soup wasn't just a meal, it was a lifeline. Families learned to stretch every penny and every ingredient, turning dried beans, root vegetables, and scraps into a broth that could nourish large crowds with very little cost. Imagine the kitchen of a 1930s farmhouse, a large cast-iron pot hanging over a wood stove, the gentle hiss of water coming to a boil. Into this pot go soaked navy beans or lentils, carrots with a bit of dirt still clinging, onions with their papery skins, a handful of potatoes peeled but still rough around the edges. Sometimes a small piece of salt pork or a ham bone was added for flavor, but often the soup was meatless, relying instead on patience and slow cooking to build a rich, hearty taste. This soup was the ultimate expression of thrift. Each ingredient was chosen because it lasted long on the shelf and could fill the stomach without costing a fortune. Dried beans soaked overnight to soften, carrots and potatoes chopped into generous chunks, onions sliced thin to melt into sweetness. All simmered together for hours until the flavors deepened and the broth turned thick and golden. Sometimes a bay leaf or a sprinkle of pepper was all the seasoning it got. The goal wasn't luxury, but sustenance and warmth. Serving this soup meant gathering around the table with bowls steaming, bread slathered in butter close at hand. It could feed a family of 6 or 8, sometimes more, often lasting for leftovers the next day. And while simple, the soup was a reminder that even in the hardest times, there was nourishment, care, and community. Today, making Depression-era vegetable soup is a tribute to those who cooked with what they had, turning scarcity into plenty and feeding more than just bodies, but hearts as well. Hoosier beef and barley stew. If you ever find yourself craving a stew that feels like a hug from the heartland, Hoosier beef and barley stew is your go-to. Born in the kitchens of Indiana farm families, this hearty dish took inexpensive cuts of beef and a humble handful of barley and transformed them into a thick, filling meal that could feed a whole crowd. It's the kind of stew that simmered all day in a heavy pot, filling the farmhouse with a rich aroma that promised comfort after a long day in the fields. Back in the early 20th century, beef was a luxury for many rural families, so they stretched every morsel. Tougher cuts like chuck or brisket, sometimes even shank, were slow cooked until they melted tender, mingling their deep, beefy flavor with the nutty chew of barley. Barley, a grain often overlooked today, was a thrifty filler with a hearty texture that soaked up all the stew's savory juices. Add in onions, carrots, and potatoes, the vegetables of the common kitchen garden, and you've got a stew that's as much about sustenance as it is about warmth and togetherness. The secret to this stew's magic was time. Low and slow was the rule, hours spent bubbling gently, allowing the beef to break down and the barley to plump up, creating a broth so rich it could warm even the coldest hands. It didn't need fancy spices or herbs, just a pinch of salt, pepper, and maybe a bay leaf for subtle depth. The result was a meal that fed large families without breaking the bank, perfect for those long winters when every calorie mattered. Serving Hoosier beef and barley stew meant ladling thick bowls into the worn crockery plates of a farmhouse kitchen, perhaps with crusty homemade bread on the side, soaking up every last drop. It was more than food. It was a daily ritual of care, resilience, and thrift. Today, it reminds us that humble ingredients, time, and patience can create a meal that feeds both body and soul. Amish choufle pie. If ever a pie could tell a story of simplicity and sweet survival, it's the Amish choufle pie. This molasses-soaked treat was a staple in Amish country kitchens, part dessert, part celebration of pantry staples, and a delicious way to stretch a little sugar and flour into a dish that could satisfy a crowd. The name choufle itself is said to come from the old practice of shooing flies away from the molasses jar, a cheeky reminder of just how sweet and sticky this pie really is. Choufle pie hails from Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, born in communities that prized thrift and practicality. When sugar was scarce or expensive, blackstrap molasses, a byproduct of sugar refining, became the sweetener of choice. It's rich, dark, and full of deep caramel notes that give the pie its distinct flavor. The filling is a simple blend of molasses, flour, baking soda, and a splash of vinegar to balance the sweetness with a subtle tang. The crust is flaky but not fancy, meant to hold the dense, sticky filling like a warm hug. On top, a crumbly streusel topping made from flour, brown sugar, and butter adds a contrasting texture, a little crunchy, a little soft, and utterly comforting. It's a humble pie, one that doesn't need whipped cream or fancy garnishes because it stands proud on the strength of its honest ingredients. In Amish homes, choufle pie wasn't just a dessert, it was a symbol of community. It could be made in large pans for church socials or family gatherings where everyone came hungry and left full, body and spirit. Its recipe, passed down through generations, speaks to a time when resourcefulness meant turning the simplest ingredients into something magical. Making choufle pie today is like opening a window to the past, tasting a slice of history that's both sweet and sturdy. It reminds us that sometimes the most modest ingredients, treated with care and patience, can create something timeless, something that nourishes more than just hunger, but memory and belonging as well. Irish colcannon. Few dishes capture the spirit of comfort and thrift quite like Irish colcannon. Imagine a steaming bowl of creamy mashed potatoes, swirling with tender ribbons of cabbage or kale, dotted with bits of buttery green onion. It's a simple dish, born of the old Irish countryside, where families fed many from the earth's humble gifts and little else. Colcannon's roots run deep in Irish immigrant kitchens across America, where cabbage and potatoes were among the cheapest and most available staples. In times when meat was a luxury, this dish became a hearty mainstay, beloved for its ability to satisfy and warm even the coldest of evenings. It's the kind of meal that's as much about memory as flavor, the kind your grandmother might have made, handed down through generations, connecting family through a shared bowl. The magic of colcannon lies in its simplicity. The potatoes are peeled, boiled until tender, and mashed with generous pats of butter and creamy milk, creating a soft, fluffy base. Into this goes finely chopped cabbage, slowly sautéed until just tender, bringing a mild sweetness and subtle crunch. Scallions or leeks often join the mix, adding a bright, oniony note that cuts through the richness. A pinch of salt and pepper is all it needs, but the flavors feel like a gentle, familiar hug. Colcannon was a way to stretch the day's meal without sacrificing heartiness. It could be served alongside a bit of bacon or salt pork when the family was lucky, or stand alone as a satisfying vegetarian option in leaner times. On Halloween, tradition even had children leaving out bowls of colcannon to welcome the spirits, a reminder of the dish's place not just in kitchens, but in the folklore of everyday life. Today, making Irish colcannon is a way to honor a heritage of thrift and comfort, bringing a taste of old-world resilience to modern tables. It's proof that when food is made with care and simplicity, it feeds more than hunger. It feeds the soul. Depression-era meatloaf with breadcrumbs. Meatloaf, that hearty, humble staple of American family tables, was born from a simple, powerful idea, making a little meat go a very long way. During the Great Depression, when every penny counted and meat was scarce, mothers stretched ground beef or pork with breadcrumbs, onions, and often grated vegetables to feed hungry mouths without emptying the larder. Picture a mother standing in a small kitchen, mixing ground meat with stale bread soaked in milk or water, chopped onions, and a pinch of salt and pepper. The texture was soft, but filling, a little like a meat-filled sponge designed to absorb flavor and fill bellies. Some recipes called for a splash of ketchup or tomato sauce on top, baked until the crust caramelized just so, giving the meatloaf a tangy, sticky finish that made it feel special despite its humble origins. This meatloaf wasn't fancy, it was a testament to resourcefulness. Breadcrumbs rescued from day-old loaves made the meat go farther, while onions added sweetness and moisture. Sometimes grated carrots or zucchini found their way in, sneaking in extra nutrition and bulk. The mixture was packed into a loaf pan or shaped by hand, then baked slowly until the house filled with that unmistakable aroma, a promise of a filling meal that could feed a family of 6 or more. Serving meatloaf meant slicing thick wedges, often accompanied by mashed potatoes and whatever vegetables were in season. It was a dish of comfort and thrift, a way to show love when resources were tight. Even today, making Depression-era meatloaf reminds us that simple ingredients, treated with care, can become a centerpiece worthy of any family table. The legacy of this meatloaf lives on in kitchens that honor frugality without sacrificing flavor or heart. It's a delicious reminder that feeding a crowd on a budget is an art, and that sometimes the most unassuming dishes tell the richest stories. Navy bean and ham hock soup. There's a humble hero in the world of budget-friendly soups, and it goes by the name navy bean and ham hock soup. This dish, beloved in both naval traditions and rural family kitchens, transformed the simplest of ingredients, dried navy beans and a leftover ham hock, into a smoky, hearty broth that could fill a pot and a belly without much fuss or expense. Back when canned goods were scarce and fresh meat was precious, families and sailors relied on dried beans for protein and longevity. Navy beans, small and creamy, soaked overnight to soften before being simmered with a salty ham hock, released their starches and flavors slowly, thickening the soup into a velvety, satisfying meal. The ham hock wasn't just a flavor booster. It was a thrifty way to use every part of the pig, stretching out precious meat into multiple meals. In those old kitchens, the soup pot would bubble for hours on a low flame, melding the earthy beans, the smoky meat, and simple seasonings like onion, garlic, and pepper into a broth that was both nourishing and soul-warming. Potatoes or carrots sometimes joined the mix, adding bulk and sweetness, but often the magic was in the beans and ham alone. The result was a soup that could feed a family of 8 or more, with leftovers that tasted even better the next day. Serving this soup meant ladling thick bowls alongside crusty bread, buttered and warm, perfect for sopping up every last drop. It was a meal that spoke of thrift and tradition, a reminder that with patience and a little ingenuity, even the cheapest ingredients could create something special. Today, navy bean and ham hock soup is a delicious nod to a past where nothing was wasted and every meal was crafted with love and practicality. It's a recipe worth reviving, not just for its flavor, but for the story it tells of feeding many from so little. Old-fashioned cornmeal mush with molasses. Long before breakfast, cereals boxed themselves into bright colors and jingles, there was cornmeal mush, simple, hearty, and endlessly versatile. This humble dish was a morning staple in many rural and frontier kitchens, where cornmeal was abundant, cheap, and reliable. Thick, creamy, and filling, cornmeal mush could feed a family of many without demanding much more than water, cornmeal, and a little time. Picture a bubbling pot on the stove where cornmeal is slowly whisked into boiling water or milk, thickening into a creamy porridge that once cooled could be sliced and fried golden brown. The crispy edges and soft centers of these fried slices were a delight, especially when drizzled with molasses, the dark, sweet syrup that added a deep caramel richness to the dish. Molasses was a pantry staple for many families, prized not just for its flavor, but for its long shelf life and affordable sweetness during lean times. Cornmeal mush was a dish of practicality and comfort, stretching a few simple ingredients into something filling and warm. It could be served as breakfast, a side dish, or even a snack throughout the day. In some homes, a pat of butter was the only adornment needed. In others, a generous pour of molasses turned the mush into a sticky sweet indulgence, loved by kids and adults alike. Beyond its taste, cornmeal mush is a window into the resourcefulness of past generations, who relied on staple grains and clever cooking to nourish large families. It's a reminder that food doesn't have to be complicated to be satisfying, and that sometimes the simplest dishes carry the richest memories. Today, reviving old-fashioned cornmeal mush with molasses is a way to connect with those who made do and made delicious with very little. It's a crispy, sweet slice of history on a plate. Potato and onion frittata. In kitchens where every ingredient counted, the potato and onion frittata was a quick, filling marvel. A one-pan meal that could stretch a handful of eggs and leftover potatoes into a satisfying feast for a family. This dish speaks of simplicity and thrift, born in immigrant homes where nothing was wasted and flavor came from care, not extravagance. Imagine a skillet warming on the stove, where thinly sliced potatoes sizzle gently with onions until soft and golden. These humble vegetables, often left over from dinner or plucked from the garden, form the base of the frittata, soaking up butter or oil and slowly caramelizing to sweet perfection. Then, beaten eggs, lightly salted and peppered, are poured over the top, binding the mixture together as it cooks low and slow. Unlike the fluffy, airy frittatas of fancy brunch spots, this version is dense, hearty, and rustic, comfort food at its most honest. It's the kind of dish that fills the kitchen with a warm, homey aroma and puts full plates in front of hungry kids who need a meal that sticks to their ribs. Sometimes, a sprinkle of fresh herbs or a dash of pepper is all it needs. This simple frittata was often served with slices of bread or a side of pickles, making a full meal that cost pennies but fed many. It's a dish that perfectly captures the spirit of making do, turning basic pantry items into a wholesome dish that could be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Today, making a potato and onion frittata invites us back to a time when cooking was about stretching ingredients, family, and warmth. It reminds us that even the simplest foods, given a little love, can nourish both body and soul. Southern red-eye gravy with grits. If ever there was a sauce that spoke of Southern thrift and flavor born from simplicity, it's red-eye gravy. Named for the reddish tint it gets from coffee mixed with pan drippings, this gravy was a staple in Southern kitchens where every drop of flavor was wrung from humble beginnings. Paired with creamy, buttery grits, it created a meal that could feed a family on the cheap, but still feel indulgent. Red-eye gravy was born out of necessity and thrift. After frying ham or country bacon, cooks would pour strong black coffee into the hot pan to deglaze, lifting the smoky, salty bits left behind. This simple mixture thickened into a thin, tangy gravy that was poured generously over grits, the ground corn porridge that has been a Southern breakfast staple for centuries. The coffee added bitterness and depth, cutting through the richness and creating a balance that was surprisingly sophisticated for such a frugal dish. Grits themselves were a kitchen workhorse, cheap, filling, and endlessly versatile. Made from ground hominy corn, they could be cooked slowly with water or milk until creamy and smooth, then slathered with butter. Together, grits and red-eye gravy offered warmth and satisfaction in every bite, perfect for feeding a large family before a day of hard work. This dish is a reminder that in the South, flavor often came from thrift, patience, and a willingness to make the most of what was on hand. It wasn't about fancy ingredients, but about coaxing richness from the simplest things. Today, Southern red-eye gravy with grits stands as a delicious nod to a past where food was both humble and hearty, showing us how clever cooking can turn pennies into comfort. Scandinavian potato pancakes, ragmunk. In the chilly kitchens of Scandinavia, where winters stretched long and fresh ingredients were precious, the potato pancake, known as ragmunk, became a beloved, thrifty staple. These crisp, golden pancakes, made from grated potatoes and a simple batter, turned humble root vegetables into something festive, filling, and surprisingly elegant. They were a way for large families to enjoy a little taste of celebration, even when money was tight. Ragmunk is deceptively simple. Raw potatoes grated finely, mixed with flour, eggs, and a touch of salt, then fried in butter or oil until the edges crisp up and the centers stay tender. The smell of potatoes sizzling in a pan, slowly turning golden, is the kind of aroma that fills a kitchen with warmth and promise. Unlike American pancakes, these are savory and slightly chewy, a perfect balance between crisp and soft. Traditionally, ragmunk were served with lingonberry jam or sour cream, both pantry staples in Scandinavian homes, and sometimes a bit of fried pork or bacon on the side. The sweet tart jam or the cool cream cuts through the rich, buttery pancakes, creating a harmony of flavors that's simple yet deeply satisfying. These pancakes were more than just food. They were a way to celebrate the harvest and the small joys of daily life, even when the world outside was cold and harsh. For families, especially those who emigrated to America, ragmunk was a connection to home and heritage, a reminder that good food could come from simple ingredients and a little elbow grease. Making Scandinavian potato pancakes today is a way to honor that resourcefulness and tradition, a crispy, golden slice of history that reminds us how potatoes and flour, combined with care, can bring joy to any table. Depression, bread, pudding. When times were tight and fresh, ingredients scarce, nothing went to waste, especially not bread. Depression. Bread pudding is the perfect example of how stale bread, once destined for the trash, could be transformed into a warm, comforting dessert that stretched sweet satisfaction to many mouths on a shoestring budget. Picture a small kitchen where leftover or slightly stale bread, maybe a few slices from the day before, is torn or cut into chunks and soaked in a mixture of milk, sugar, and eggs. Sometimes cinnamon, nutmeg, or a splash of vanilla would be added if there was a little extra on hand, giving the pudding a gentle warmth and fragrant sweetness. Raisins or dried fruit might sneak in, adding bursts of surprise among the soft, custardy bread. Baked slowly until golden on top and creamy inside, this bread pudding was a gift of patience and thrift. It turned the simplest pantry staples into a dessert that felt indulgent and satisfying, perfect for families who needed a little sweetness but couldn't afford the luxury of cake or pies. The aroma of warm custard and spices wafting through the house was a small comfort in difficult days. What makes this pudding special is how it embodies the spirit of resourcefulness, rescuing something as humble as stale bread and turning it into a dish that fed not just hunger, but hope. It could be eaten warm, with a drizzle of syrup, a spoonful of cream, or simply on its own. A quiet celebration of what was possible when ingenuity met necessity. Today, depression bread pudding invites us to reconnect with a past where every crumb mattered, and where sweetness came from love and cleverness as much as from sugar. It's a delicious reminder that sometimes the humblest ingredients hold the richest stories. Beans and cornbread casserole. In the kitchens of the rural South and Midwest, beans and cornbread casserole was a trusty staple, a dish that turned simple, affordable ingredients into a satisfying meal for large families. This humble casserole layered hearty beans with a golden crust of cornbread, offering a filling, comforting meal that didn't demand a lot of money, but gave plenty of warmth and nourishment. The magic started with dried beans, pinto, navy, or black-eyed, soaked overnight and simmered slowly until tender and creamy. Beans were a beloved protein source, inexpensive and packed with nutrition, perfect for feeding a crowd. Mixed into the beans might be onions, a splash of molasses or molasses-based sauce, and a touch of pepper to add flavor without fuss. Then came the cornbread, made from cornmeal mixed with buttermilk or milk, eggs, and a bit of baking soda or powder, poured over the beans and baked until golden and crusty on top. This layered casserole was a meal of contrasts. The soft, savory beans bubbling beneath a crust that was crumbly, slightly sweet, and buttery. It was a dish born of thrift and tradition, often served with a dollop of butter or a splash of hot sauce for those who liked a little kick. Best of all, it could be made in a large pan, feeding hungry mouths without a lot of fuss or expense. For families who grew up eating this casserole, it wasn't just about filling stomachs. It was a reminder of home, community, and the joy of sharing simple food made well. It's a dish that celebrates the power of staple ingredients and the way patience and care can turn humble beans and cornmeal into a feast. Today, beans and cornbread casserole invites us to slow down, appreciate simple flavors, and remember how food can nourish more than just hunger. It feeds tradition and togetherness. Cabbage and noodles, haluski. In homes across Eastern Europe and the immigrant neighborhoods of America, cabbage and noodles, known as haluski, was a simple, beloved dish that fed large families on a tight budget with hearty, humble ingredients. It's a dish that embraces thrift, turning just a few pantry staples into a warm, satisfying meal that fills both belly and heart. The story begins with cabbage, the workhorse vegetable of many old country kitchens. Affordable, long-lasting, and filling, cabbage was often sautéed slowly in butter or rendered bacon fat until soft and fragrant, its slight sweetness balanced by the rich fat. Egg noodles, wide and tender, were boiled to perfection, then combined with the cabbage for a harmonious marriage of textures and flavors. The whole dish was seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of onion or garlic, making it a no-frills meal that was nonetheless deeply comforting. Haluski's strength lay in its versatility and simplicity. For families who couldn't always afford meat, it was a filling vegetarian option. When meat was available, bits of bacon or sausage were sometimes added to enrich the dish. It was a common supper for hardworking immigrant families, a quick meal that could be whipped up with pantry staples and fresh cabbage from the garden. Served steaming hot, haluski was often eaten straight from the skillet, sometimes alongside a dollop of sour cream or a slice of crusty bread. Its rich, buttery aroma filled the kitchen, promising a meal that was both affordable and nourishing. Today, cabbage and noodles remains a testament to immigrant resourcefulness and the power of simple ingredients. It reminds us how a few humble vegetables and noodles treated with love and patience can create a dish that feeds a crowd and carries the weight of history on every forkful. Lentil and rice pilaf. In kitchens across the world, especially in immigrant and rural households, lentil and rice pilaf has long been a trusted friend to families feeding many on a budget. This simple, wholesome dish combines two inexpensive staples, lentils and rice, into a comforting, nourishing meal that's as filling as it is frugal. Lentils, often called the poor man's meat, are tiny powerhouses of nutrition and flavor. Packed with protein and fiber, they soak up spices and seasonings like a sponge, making them a perfect partner for plain rice. In this pilaf, brown or green lentils are gently simmered with onions and garlic until tender, then mixed with fluffy, steamed rice. A splash of broth, a pinch of salt, and perhaps a bay leaf or two lend subtle aroma without the need for expensive ingredients. This dish's charm lies in its simplicity and adaptability. Whether made in a farmhouse kitchen in the American Midwest or an immigrant home bustling with new traditions, lentil and rice pilaf could be flavored with whatever herbs or vegetables were on hand: carrots, celery, or a sprig of thyme. Its warmth and heartiness made it a go-to meal to feed families large and small, stretching humble ingredients to their fullest. Often served alongside fresh vegetables or a simple salad, this pilaf filled plates and hearts alike, offering comfort in every bite. It was a dish that required patience and love more than money, slowly simmering lentils and rice until they melded into a perfect harmony of textures. Today, lentil and rice pilaf invites us back to a time when feeding a crowd meant creativity and care. It's a dish that celebrates thrift and tradition, a simple reminder that good food doesn't have to be fancy to be unforgettable. Split pea soup with ham bone. Few soups capture the essence of thrift and comfort quite like split pea soup with ham bone. This classic dish hails from kitchens where nothing was wasted and every part of the animal was cherished, especially the ham bone, which lent smoky, savory richness to the humble dried peas simmered into creamy perfection. Imagine a large pot on the stove, filled with dried split peas soaked overnight, and a well-used ham bone nestled in among them. Onions, carrots, and celery join the party, bringing sweetness and depth to the broth. Hours of gentle simmering coax the peas to break down, thickening the soup into a velvety texture that clings to the spoon and warms the soul. Split pea soup was a mainstay in both farmhouses and urban homes, prized for its economy and nutrition. Peas were cheap, easy to store, and packed with protein, making them a vital ingredient for feeding large families during lean times. The ham bone, often left over from a holiday meal, was a way to stretch flavor across days of cooking, ensuring nothing went to waste. Seasoning was simple: a pinch of salt, some pepper, and maybe a bay leaf or a splash of vinegar to brighten the flavors. The soup, hearty and thick, could be ladled into bowls alongside a slice of crusty bread or cornbread, perfect for soaking up every drop. Making split pea soup with ham bone today is a tribute to generations who turned humble staples into sustenance and warmth. It reminds us that good cooking isn't about extravagance, but about patience, resourcefulness, and love. Meatless chili with beans and tomato. When meat was scarce or saved for special occasions, families turned to meatless chili, a humble, hearty dish that packed flavor and nutrition without breaking the bank. This chili, made from dried beans, canned tomatoes, and a blend of spices, was a staple in kitchens where feeding a large family meant stretching every ingredient with care and creativity. The base was simple but mighty. Soaked beans simmered until tender, mingling with rich, tangy tomatoes and a hint of chili powder, cumin, and garlic. These spices brought warmth and a bit of heat, transforming basic pantry staples into a bowl of comforting, robust flavor. Onions and bell peppers often joined the mix, adding sweetness and texture, while a dash of vinegar or a spoonful of molasses could deepen the complexity. Meatless chili wasn't just about frugality. It was a celebration of beans, the magic ingredient that could fill tummies and nourish bodies on a dime. Served over rice or with cornbread, it became a complete meal, satisfying and rich in protein and fiber. Families treasured this chili not just for its economy, but for its ability to warm cold evenings and bring everyone around the table. It was a reminder that great flavor could come from humble beginnings, and that food cooked with heart could feed both body and soul. Today, meatless chili stands as a testament to resourcefulness, a delicious way to reconnect with traditions of thrift and family. It's a recipe worth revisiting, a spicy, soulful nod to the kitchens of the past. Chicken and dumplings. Few dishes evoke the cozy feeling of a family gathering quite like chicken and dumplings. This beloved comfort food has roots in rural America, where a single chicken, often a tough old hen, was stretched into a hearty stew, its tender broth cradling fluffy, doughy dumplings that soaked up every bit of flavor. It was a meal designed to feed many, filling bellies and hearts with simple goodness. Imagine a large pot bubbling softly on the stove, the aroma of simmering chicken mingling with onions, carrots, and celery. The chicken, often simmered until the meat fell from the bone, lent its richness to the broth, turning it into a golden elixir of home-cooked warmth. Then came the dumplings, simple dough made from flour, water, and a pinch of salt, dropped in spoonfuls to float gently on the surface, cooking through to tender clouds of comfort. This dish was the perfect way to use every part of a chicken, especially when fresh meat was precious. The dumplings stretched the meal, turning it into a feast that could satisfy a large family on a tight budget. Served hot, with thick broth and soft vegetables, chicken and dumplings was more than food. It was a symbol of care and endurance through hard times. Even today, making chicken and dumplings recalls a time when cooking was about patience, thrift, and love. It's a hearty reminder that the simplest ingredients, combined with a little time and tenderness, can become a meal that feeds both body and soul. Potato soup with leeks. Potato. Soup with leeks is a classic winter warmer that carries the heart of humble ingredients made whole through slow cooking and simple love. In times past, when fresh produce was scarce through long cold months, root vegetables like potatoes and leeks were relied upon for their longevity, affordability, and satisfying flavor. This soup was a mainstay in many family kitchens, filling bowls and warming spirits. Picture a big pot gently simmering, where diced potatoes soften and leeks, mild and sweet, sautéed first in butter, slowly release their fragrance and flavor into a creamy base. Sometimes a splash of milk or cream was added if it was on hand, but often the broth itself, thickened by the starch of the potatoes, was enough to create a silky, rich soup. Salt and pepper provided just enough seasoning, keeping the flavors simple and honest. This soup could feed many with just a few inexpensive ingredients, often accompanied by thick slices of bread fresh from the oven or toasted to perfection. It was a dish of comfort, one spoonful melting away the chill and bringing a sense of home, no matter the weather outside. Today, potato soup with leeks reminds us of the beauty in simplicity, how a few staples, patiently prepared, can create a meal both nourishing and heartwarming. It's a cozy nod to kitchens of the past, where thrift met tenderness. Pea soup and bread bowls. There was a time when every crumb counted and no piece of bread went unused. Pea soup and bread bowls are a perfect example of this frugal, creative spirit, a meal that turned humble dried peas and rustic loaves into a comforting feast that could feed many without costing a fortune. Dried split peas, soaked and simmered slowly with simple aromatics like onions, carrots, and celery, broke down into a thick, creamy soup full of earthy goodness. A ham bone or a smoked ham hock often joined the pot, infusing the broth with smoky, savory notes that warmed the soul. As the soup thickened and the flavors melded, the kitchen would fill with a homely aroma, promising a meal that was both hearty and nourishing. Fry bread tacos, Navajo tacos. Few dishes carry the story of survival and cultural pride quite like fry bread tacos, also known as Navajo tacos. Born from hardship and resilience, fry bread became a cornerstone of Native American kitchens during times when traditional food sources were scarce, yet the spirit of community and ingenuity remained strong. This dish is both a hearty meal and a cultural emblem. Simple, affordable, and packed with flavor. Fry bread itself is a marvel of humble ingredients: flour, water, salt, and a bit of fat, quickly mixed, rolled, and fried to golden perfection. The result is a soft, slightly chewy flatbread with crispy edges, a perfect vehicle for stretching modest toppings into a filling meal. This bread was born of necessity, turning scarce resources into something satisfying and nourishing. Once fried, the bread is topped with seasoned ground beef or beans, fresh vegetables like tomatoes and lettuce, and often cheese or salsa when available. The combination of crispy, warm fry bread with savory toppings transforms this simple base into a feast that could fill hungry families at little cost. It's a dish that invites hands-on sharing, eaten straight from a paper plate at community gatherings or family meals alike. Fry bread tacos carry a deeper story of adaptation, perseverance, and the strength of cultural identity. They honor a tradition of making do while holding fast to heritage. Each bite connects past to present, telling a tale far richer than the ingredients alone. Today, Navajo tacos remain a beloved comfort food, reminding us that even in hardship, creativity and culture can turn the simplest of foods into a celebration of life. Chicken and rice casserole. Chicken and rice casserole is a quintessential mid-century family favorite, born out of a need to stretch a modest chicken into a meal that could satisfy a hungry household without fuss or expense. This baked dish turned pantry staples and leftover chicken into a creamy, comforting casserole that warmed both the kitchen and the heart. Imagine tender chunks of cooked chicken nestled into a bed of fluffy rice, all bathed in a sauce made from a can of condensed cream soup, usually mushroom or celery, mixed with milk or broth. Sometimes frozen or canned vegetables were stirred in for color and nutrition, transforming the simple dish into a full meal. Topped with a sprinkle of breadcrumbs or cheese, it was baked until bubbling and golden, filling the house with an aroma that invited everyone to the table. In the days before convenience meals were everywhere, chicken and rice casserole was a clever shortcut. It used leftovers wisely and took advantage of inexpensive pantry ingredients, making it possible to feed many mouths with little effort or money. This casserole was especially popular in post-war America when families sought hearty, economical dishes that could easily be doubled for gatherings or church suppers. Serving this casserole meant slicing generous portions onto plates, often with a side of crisp salad or steamed greens. The creamy texture and savory flavor made it a favorite across generations, a dish that embodied home-cooked love without pretense. Today, chicken and rice casserole invites us to remember a time when thrift and comfort found harmony in a single dish. It's a delicious reminder that feeding a crowd doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes simple ingredients and a little ingenuity are all it takes. Goulash with macaroni and ground beef. Goulash, in many American kitchens, became a beloved one-pot meal that transformed a small amount of ground beef and a simple handful of macaroni into a hearty, flavorful feast fit to feed a family on a budget. This dish, inspired by Eastern European stews but made frugally with pantry staples, carried the comforting promise of warmth, fullness, and thrift. Picture a skillet where ground beef sizzles with onions and garlic, slowly releasing its rich aroma. To this, canned tomatoes or tomato sauce join the party, bubbling gently as the mixture simmers with a touch of paprika, salt, and pepper. Then elbow macaroni is stirred in, cooking right in the sauce until tender, absorbing all those savory, tangy flavors. This goulash wasn't fancy. It was honest food, the kind that filled lunchboxes and dinner plates alike. It was quick to make, affordable, and satisfying, perfect for busy families who needed to stretch ingredients without sacrificing taste. A sprinkle of cheese on top was a special treat, but even without it, the dish was hearty enough to please a crowd. The beauty of this goulash was its adaptability. Leftover vegetables could be tossed in and spices adjusted to taste. It was a dish that could easily be doubled to feed a church supper or a neighborhood potluck, embodying the communal spirit of sharing food and stories. Today, goulash with macaroni and ground beef remains a comforting reminder of kitchens past, of meals made with what was at hand and the love that made them memorable. It's proof that simple ingredients, combined with care, can create dishes that last far beyond the dinner table. Potato and turnip stew. When the cold winds of winter blew across Appalachian hills and rural farms, families turned to hearty root vegetables to fill their tables. Potato and turnip stew was a staple of those homes, a thick, warming dish that used the earth's simplest gifts to feed many with little cost but plenty of comfort. This stew began with chunky potatoes and turnips, peeled and chopped roughly, tossed into a large pot with a splash of broth or water. Onions, perhaps a carrot or two, and a handful of herbs like thyme or bay leaf lent subtle fragrance as everything simmered low and slow. The vegetables softened into a tender, thick stew, their flavors melding into a rich, earthy harmony that was both nourishing and filling. Often, families added bits of salt pork or bacon when they could spare it, rendering fat and flavor into the stew. But it was just as satisfying without. The thick broth clung to each bite, warming hands and hearts alike on cold evenings. Potato and turnip stew was more than a meal. It was a reminder of resilience, how families could survive and even thrive on what the land gave them, using simple, affordable ingredients in creative, loving ways. Served alongside coarse bread or biscuits, this stew fed bodies and souls, wrapping those gathered around the table in warmth and togetherness. Today, making potato and turnip stew connects us to a past where food was humble, resourceful, and deeply comforting, a timeless dish that reminds us that sometimes the simplest meals carry the richest legacy. Tomato and egg stir-fry, Chinese peasant dish. In the kitchens of Chinese peasants, where ingredients were precious and meals needed to feed large families without extravagance, tomato and egg stir-fry became a beloved classic. This simple, quick dish turns just a few affordable ingredients, ripe tomatoes, fresh eggs, and a handful of pantry staples, into a bright, comforting meal that's as nourishing as it is flavorful. Imagine eggs beaten until fluffy and gently scrambled in a hot pan, soft and tender like little golden clouds. Then, juicy tomatoes, often in season or canned, are added, cooking down into a tangy, slightly sweet sauce that mingles beautifully with the eggs. A splash of soy sauce, a pinch of sugar, and a hint of garlic or ginger bring balance, creating layers of flavor with minimal fuss. This dish embodies frugality and creativity. Eggs provide protein without the high cost of meat, while tomatoes bring freshness and color. It's a meal that can be served over rice or noodles, feeding many with very little expense. Beyond its simplicity, tomato and egg stir-fry carries the spirit of resilience and warmth. It was a staple in homes where the family table was a place of gathering and sustenance, proving that humble ingredients can create satisfying meals that nourish both body and soul. Today, making this dish connects us to a tradition of clever cooking born from necessity, a delicious reminder that sometimes the simplest dishes carry the most heart. Bread and butter pickle salad. When fresh vegetables were scarce or costly, preserving the harvest was not just practical, it was essential. Bread and butter pickle salad is a tangy, sweet, and crunchy dish born from the tradition of pickling cucumbers to extend their shelf life and add zest to humble meals. This salad was a welcome bright spot on family tables, offering a refreshing contrast to heavier dishes. The cucumbers, sliced thin and soaked briefly in brine, are tossed with a mixture of vinegar, sugar, mustard seeds, and turmeric, creating the signature tangy sweet bread and butter flavor. Sliced onions join the mix, adding a sharp bite that balances the sweetness, while a sprinkle of celery seed or peppercorns might deepen the complexity. Often served chilled, this salad was a favorite accompaniment to meatloaf, beans, or fried foods, adding crunch and a burst of acidity that cut through richness and refreshed the palate. For families on a budget, it was a clever way to make simple vegetables shine, turning garden bounty or market finds into something special. Bread and butter. Pickle salad is more than a side dish. It's a testament to the ingenuity of preserving and flavoring food to stretch meals and bring joy to the table. It carries the essence of seasons past, when gardens and pantries were tended carefully and every bite was savored. Today, making this salad is like opening a jar of nostalgia, a crisp, tangy reminder that even the simplest preserved foods can brighten a meal and connect us to a legacy of resourcefulness and flavor. Rice and beans, Caribbean style. Few dishes capture the spirit of stretching simple, affordable ingredients into a feast quite like Caribbean rice and beans. This humble staple has fed countless families across the islands for generations. Born from necessity, shaped by culture, and elevated by love. It's a meal that speaks of community tables, long days in the kitchen, and the art of turning pantry basics into something vibrant and nourishing enough to feed large families on a budget. In the Caribbean, rice and beans go together like sun and sand, a pairing that's as natural as the ocean breeze. This dish, often called rice and peas, despite usually featuring beans, reflects the resourcefulness of island life, where imported and local staples mix to create meals of deep flavor and hearty satisfaction. Families relied on inexpensive dried beans, red kidney beans, pigeon peas, or black beans, slow-cooked to tender perfection, and paired them with rice, the grain that could bulk up any meal without stretching the wallet. The magic starts with soaking the dried beans overnight, softening them so they cook evenly and quickly. The beans are then simmered with aromatic herbs like thyme and scallions, and infused with the smoky depth of a few slices of salted pork or a piece of cured ham hock, if available. A little garlic and fresh hot pepper add layers of warmth and spice, while coconut milk, often a luxury but sometimes used, brings a creamy richness that transforms the dish into something truly special. When coconut milk isn't on hand, water and a splash of oil keep it simple and humble, but still satisfying. Once the beans are tender, rinsed rice is folded in and cooked slowly in the seasoned broth, absorbing every drop of flavor and swelling into a fluffy, fragrant bed of comfort. The grains soak up the savory liquid, mingling with the tender beans to create a harmony of textures and tastes, a celebration of simplicity and depth. The scent that rises from the pot is intoxicating. Earthy beans, fragrant herbs, a touch of smoke, and just the right hint of heat from the pepper. Caribbean rice and beans wasn't just food, it was a daily ritual, a way for families to gather and share after a long day. It could be served plain or alongside fried plantains, stewed meats, or spicy sauces for those lucky enough to have more on the table. But even on the leanest days, a bowl of rice and beans filled with love and tradition was enough to nourish body and spirit. What makes this dish enduring is its versatility and the stories it carries. Each island and each family has its own spin on the recipe, handed down through generations, blending indigenous, African, and European influences. It's a dish that speaks of survival, adaptation, and cultural pride, all simmering together in one pot. Today, cooking Caribbean rice and beans invites us to slow down and savor the art of stretching humble ingredients into something extraordinary. It's a reminder that feeding many on a budget is not just about economics, it's about culture, connection, and creativity. This dish teaches us that simplicity can be soulful, that tradition can be delicious, and that the most affordable meals often carry the deepest love. So when you stir the pot, remember, you're not just making a meal. You're continuing a legacy of resilience and togetherness, one fragrant spoonful at a time. Borscht with sour cream. Borscht, the vibrant beet soup beloved across Eastern Europe, is more than just a meal. It's a celebration of humble roots and hearty resilience, a dish that has fed large families on a shoestring while warming souls with its brilliant color and comforting flavor. In kitchens where poverty was common but pride in food was fierce, borscht became a symbol of nourishment, tradition, and community. Picture a large pot simmering gently over a stove, filled with deep red broth that looks almost like liquid garnet. The color comes from beets, earthy, sweet, and packed with nutrients, slow cooked, with onions, cabbage, and carrots. Sometimes potatoes, tomatoes, or even a splash of vinegar are added, each ingredient layering its own texture and tang. The soup often includes a smoky ham bone or a few strips of bacon when available, though in lean times it was meatless, but no less rich in flavor. Borscht's origins trace back centuries, deeply rooted in peasant kitchens where food had to be affordable, plentiful, and filling. Beets were prized because they were cheap to grow and kept well through winter months, providing essential vitamins and sweetness when fresh produce was scarce. The soup was served hot in the cold months to fight off chill and hunger, often accompanied by thick slices of rye or sourdough bread, perfect for dipping into the bright broth. The magic of borscht is in the balance of flavors. The natural sweetness of the beets contrasts with the tanginess of vinegar or lemon juice, creating a bright, lively soup that is anything but bland. A generous dollop of sour cream, spooned on just before serving, adds creaminess and cools the soup's acidity, making every bite smooth and soothing. The sour cream also carries a rich, tangy note that enhances the beets' earthy depth. Borscht was traditionally made in large batches, enough to feed extended families and neighbors, reflecting the communal spirit of old-world kitchens. It was a dish for gatherings, festivals, and everyday dinners alike, nourishing bodies and forging bonds around the table. The recipe, often passed down through generations, varied from village to village and family to family, with each adding their own touches: garlic, dill, or even beans for extra heartiness. Making borscht today connects us to that legacy of thrift and tradition, reminding us that food is about more than sustenance. It's about memory, identity, and the joy of sharing. The vibrant color on the plate, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and the satisfying taste all tell a story of endurance and ingenuity. For modern cooks, borscht offers a delicious way to feed many without a hefty grocery bill. It's vegetarian-friendly, adaptable, and packed with nutrition. Proof that the simplest ingredients, when combined with care and love, can create something truly special. So as you ladle borscht into bowls and swirl in the sour cream, think of the generations who did the same. Families who made magic out of modest means and crafted meals that fed not just hunger, but hope. Vegetable stir-fry with tofu. In kitchens across many immigrant communities where fresh ingredients were sometimes scarce and budgets tight, the humble vegetable stir-fry with tofu became a beloved way to feed large families on a dime. This dish embodies the spirit of making do, turning seasonal vegetables and affordable protein into a vibrant, nourishing meal that celebrates both thrift and flavor. Imagine a hot skillet, or wok, sizzling gently as a medley of crisp, colorful vegetables, cabbage, carrots, bell peppers, and onions, are quickly tossed in shimmering oil. The aroma of garlic and ginger wafts through the kitchen, signaling the start of something simple, yet soulful. Then cubes of tofu, that modest but mighty source of plant-based protein, are added to the pan. Absorbing the flavors around them, the tofu becomes golden and tender, adding substance and heartiness to the dish without the cost of meat. Tofu, often called the meat of the poor in some communities, was prized not only for its affordability, but for its versatility and nutrition. It stretches protein to feed many, soaking up sauces and spices, making it an ideal choice for families balancing flavor and budget. Paired with vegetables, it creates a balanced meal that's both light and filling. The sauce is the secret star, typically a blend of soy sauce, a touch of sugar or honey, and a splash of vinegar or citrus juice for brightness. Sometimes a spoonful of chili paste adds heat, while sesame oil lends a fragrant nuttiness that brings everything together. This sauce coats the tofu and vegetables, turning simple ingredients into a harmony of sweet, salty, tangy, and spicy notes. What makes this stir-fry truly special is its adaptability. Families would use whatever vegetables were in season or on hand: green beans, mushrooms, bok choy, or even frozen peas, making it a flexible dish that changed with the market and the seasons. It was a way to use up leftovers and stretch a meal to feed hungry mouths without waste. Serving the stir-fry over steamed rice or noodles turned it into a complete meal, hearty enough to satisfy and affordable enough to make regularly. It was a dish that could be prepared quickly on busy weeknights, yet its flavors and textures made it feel like a celebration of everyday ingredients. For many immigrant families, vegetable stir-fry with tofu was more than sustenance. It was a link to homeland flavors, a way to preserve culture while adapting to new surroundings. It speaks to the resilience and creativity of those who made large families feel loved and nourished despite economic hardship. Today, revisiting this dish invites us to appreciate the beauty of simplicity and the power of combining humble ingredients with care. It's a reminder that cooking frugally doesn't mean sacrificing taste or tradition. Vegetable stir-fry with tofu teaches us that meals made with intention and heart can transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. So as you toss those vegetables and tofu in the sizzling pan, remember you're partaking in a culinary legacy of resourcefulness and warmth, a feast that's affordable, flavorful, and rooted in love. Jiffy cornbread and bean stew. There's a quiet magic in dishes born of necessity, where thrift and taste come together to create meals that feed large families without breaking the bank. Jiffy cornbread and bean stew is one such marvel, a humble, hearty pairing that has long graced tables across rural America, church suppers, and bustling family kitchens. It's a story of simple ingredients, clever shortcuts, and the kind of comfort food that feels like home, no matter how hard times get. At the heart of this meal is the stew, a thick, bubbling pot of beans, simmered low and slow to tender perfection. Beans have always been a cornerstone of frugal cooking. Packed with protein and fiber, dried beans were inexpensive, easy to store, and could be transformed into countless dishes with just a few basic additions. For this stew, pinto beans or navy beans are the stars, soaking overnight and cooking down into a creamy, hearty base. The beans are often cooked with onions, garlic, and a bit of smoked or salted pork if it's available, a luxury that adds a smoky depth to the otherwise simple dish. For families who couldn't afford meat, spices like paprika, black pepper, and a pinch of chili powder brought warmth and complexity. Sometimes canned tomatoes were added for acidity and body, balancing the richness and giving the stew a reddish hue. This stew could simmer for hours, filling the kitchen with an aroma that invited hungry families to gather round. Then there's the cornbread, the trusty partner to any bean stew, and for many, the heart of the meal. Jiffy cornbread, the quick and easy boxed mix introduced in the 1930s, revolutionized home cooking by making baking accessible, fast, and affordable. With just a few added staples, milk, eggs, and a little oil, home cooks could whip up a golden, tender cornbread that perfectly complemented the hearty beans. Its slightly sweet, crumbly texture was ideal for soaking up every last drop of stew, making each bite a satisfying mix of savory and sweet. The beauty of pairing Jiffy cornbread with bean stew is in its simplicity and synergy. The warm, dense cornbread contrasts with the creamy, rich stew, one soaking up flavors, the other offering a gentle sweetness that balances the dish. Together, they create a meal that's far greater than the sum of its parts, inexpensive, filling, and deeply comforting. This pairing has a rich history tied to the American experience of feeding large families through lean times. The Great Depression, in particular, saw households rely on beans and cornbread as staples, teaching generations that hearty, affordable food could bring joy and sustenance alike. At church potlucks, county fairs, and family dinners, Jiffy cornbread and bean stew was often the dish that filled plates and hearts with equal measure. What makes this meal timeless is its adaptability. Home cooks could add whatever vegetables were on hand, bell peppers, tomatoes, or greens, to the stew, adjusting spices to their taste. The cornbread could be baked in a skillet for a crispy crust or in a simple pan for a softer crumb. It was a dish that welcomed creativity, making do with what was available, yet always delivering on warmth and nourishment. For families, this meal was more than food. It was a ritual of gathering and sharing, a testament to resourcefulness and care. It brought generations together around kitchen tables and community halls, reminding all who partook that even in hard times, there was comfort in food made with love. Today, Jiffy cornbread and bean stew invites us to reconnect with a simpler way of cooking, one that values frugality, flavor, and family. It's a delicious reminder that the best meals don't require extravagance, just a bit of time, patience, and heart. So whether you're stirring a pot of beans or mixing up a batch of cornbread batter, you're continuing a legacy of feeding many with humble ingredients and plenty of love. Bread, pudding with raisins and nutmeg. If there's one dish that embodies the very spirit of making do with what you have, it's bread pudding. A dessert born out of necessity and shaped by ingenuity, bread pudding with raisins and nutmeg tells a story as rich and comforting as its custardy texture and fragrant spices. For generations, families feeding large households on a budget have turned stale or leftover bread into a warm, sweet finale that satisfies not only the belly, but the soul. Picture a kitchen in the early 20th century where every crumb was precious and wasting food was simply not an option. In those days, bread was baked fresh daily or purchased at the local bakery, but leftovers and day-old loaves were inevitable. Rather than tossing out hardened slices, resourceful cooks saw an opportunity. Soak that bread in a mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, and warming spices, then bake it slowly until golden and custardy. The result was a dessert that felt indulgent but cost next to nothing. Raisins, those tiny bursts of sweetness, were often tucked into the pudding, adding chewy texture and a fruity contrast that lifted the dish beyond plain custard. Nutmeg, a fragrant and slightly spicy ground seed, brought warmth and aroma, its scent filling the kitchen with the promise of comfort. Some recipes included cinnamon, vanilla, or even a splash of bourbon or rum when times were a little easier, but the heart of the dish was always the same. Simple ingredients turned into something special through patience and care. Bread pudding's charm lies in its texture, a soft, almost creamy interior punctuated by bits of soaked bread that hold their shape, contrasted by a lightly crisp top that catches the oven's golden kiss. It's a dish that bridges the gap between dessert and breakfast, often served warm with a drizzle of cream, a scoop of ice cream, or a simple dusting of powdered sugar. This humble pudding was a staple in homes where large families needed to stretch every dollar, turning stale bread and pantry staples into a crowd pleaser that could feed many. It was a way to avoid waste, honor the bounty of the bakery or garden, and bring a sweet ending to the day's meal. Often baked in large pans or casseroles, it was perfect for feeding a room full of hungry children, neighbors, or church groups. The origins of bread pudding stretch back centuries, crossing continents and cultures. It was known by various names and recipes, but the core idea remained, rescuing bread from the bin and elevating it into a nourishing dish. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, bread pudding became especially important, a reminder that luxury could be found in simplicity and that every bite could be savored, even in scarcity. In many families, bread pudding carried sentimental value as well. Recipes were handed down, sometimes scribbled on faded cards, often tweaked with a grandmother's secret touch, a little extra spice, a handful of nuts, or a splash of something special. Making bread pudding was a ritual that connected generations, a moment where the past was tasted and the present was warmed by tradition. For the home cook today, bread pudding invites a slower pace. It encourages patience, soaking the bread just long enough, baking until the custard sets but remains tender, allowing the spices to bloom. It reminds us that cooking isn't always about speed or sophistication, but about heart and mindfulness. The smells that fill the kitchen, the sweet milk, the spicy nutmeg, the toasty bread, are a comforting embrace. Bread pudding's versatility is another reason it endures. While the classic version calls for simple white or wheat bread, variations abound, from brioche to challah, each bringing its own richness. Raisins can be swapped for dried cranberries, currants, or chopped apples. Spices shift with seasons: cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and toppings range from caramel sauce to whipped cream. Yet, no matter the changes, the essence remains, a dish of humble ingredients transformed into warmth and sweetness. Nutritionally, bread pudding is a hearty dessert, offering carbohydrates, some protein from the eggs, and a modest amount of fat from butter or cream. For large families in lean times, it was both a treat and a source of energy, a small indulgence that didn't empty the pantry. Serving bread pudding is often a communal experience. In homes large and small, it's ladled generously onto plates, sometimes accompanied by a cup of tea or coffee, a moment to slow down and savor. It's the kind of dessert that sparks conversation, brings smiles, and evokes memories of childhood kitchens, of holidays, and of shared meals that fed more than hunger. For anyone seeking to recreate this dish, the process is beautifully simple. Stale bread cut or torn into pieces, soaked in a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and spices, stirred in raisins, poured into a buttered dish, and baked until puffed and golden. The wait, as it bakes, is rewarded by a sensory symphony of aromas and textures. Bread pudding is a dish that teaches us about resilience, how resourcefulness in the kitchen can turn scarcity into abundance. It's a reminder that food connects us across time and place. that traditions nourish not just bodies, but identities. It invites us to honor the past while making something new, to find sweetness. So next time you spot a few slices of day-old bread, think twice before tossing them out. With a few eggs, a splash of milk, some sugar, and a sprinkle of nutmeg, you can create a dish that's more than dessert. It's history, heart, and home, all baked into one golden, fragrant casserole. As we close this journey through 30 forgotten meals, it's important to reflect on what these humble dishes truly represent. Beyond simple ingredients and cooking methods, they tell stories of resilience, creativity, and community. A time when families fed many with little more than heart and resourcefulness. In today's fast-paced world, where convenience often overshadows tradition and abundance can lead to waste, it's easy to overlook the quiet brilliance of these recipes. They come from an era when every penny counted and food was precious, never taken for granted. Yet their simplicity carries profound lessons that reach far beyond the kitchen. Feeding many on pennies wasn't just about stretching a dollar, it was an act of love. It required skill, patience, and the art of making the most of what was on hand. From Depression-era vegetable soup, made with dried beans and root scraps, to Amish choufle pie, sweetened with molasses, each meal was a labor of care, nourishing bodies and spirits alike. These recipes share a common thread: reverence for leftovers, clever use of pantry staples, and transforming inexpensive ingredients through slow cooking and thoughtful combinations. Potatoes, beans, cabbage, cornmeal, and dried peas were not just sustenance, but carriers of tradition, connecting generations and cultures shaped by immigrant hands, rural ingenuity, and the determination of those facing hardship. These meals were designed to feed many with dignity. No fancy gadgets or rare spices, just what was available, carefully prepared and shared. They remind modern cooks that feeding large groups doesn't have to be costly or complicated. They invite us to slow down, embrace cooking from scratch, and find joy in the ordinary. Food becomes more than fuel. It's memory, culture, and community. Whether simmering a pot of Hoosier beef and barley stew or sharing Colcannon mashed potatoes with cabbage, these dishes tell stories without words, stories of history, hope, and survival. By revisiting these recipes, we honor those who came before us and revive a mindset that values sustainability, reduces waste, and celebrates simplicity. There's magic in turning stale bread into custardy bread pudding or dried beans into a hearty stew, a testament to human ingenuity and love. For today's families, these meals offer practical solutions, recipes that feed a crowd, use common ingredients, and stretch leftovers. They inspire connection, asking us to slow down, savor the process, and share stories around the table.
As you try these dishes, know you're part of a lineage of cooks who fed many on pennies with pride and care. You're keeping alive a tradition of resilience, community, and love.
Here's to those cooks, the mothers, fathers, grandparents, and neighbors, whose wisdom teaches us to waste less, share more, and find joy in the simple art of feeding those we love. Thank you for joining this journey into forgotten kitchens and old-fashioned feasts. May these recipes bring warmth, comfort, and connection to your home for generations to come.